February 14th, 1933. Bumpy Johnson was outnumbered 15-1. Dutch Schultz had deployed his deadliest crew. Tommy the Executioner, Vento. Marty Icepick Delaney, Big Mike Rossetti, 13 more killers whose names even the FBI didn't know. They cornered Bumpy in the Cotton Club basement at 4:30 in the morning. No witnesses, no backup, no way out. Bumpy was 27 years old, still making his name in Harlem. Dutch was the most feared mobster in New York, a man who'd personally killed over 40 people. Everyone expected the same ending. Bumpy Johnson dead in a basement, forgotten by sunrise. But what Dutch Schultz didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had learned something in all those street fights, all those prison riots, all those wars over territory. He'd learned that violence has a rhythm, and when you control the rhythm, numbers don't matter. 90 minutes later, only one of those 15 men walked out alive, and the message he delivered to Dutch Schultz didn't just shock Harlem. It terrified it. Because what Bumpy Johnson did in that basement proved something that changed the entire power structure of New York's underworld. This is the story of the night Bumpy Johnson became untouchable. To understand what happened on Valentine's Day 1933, you need to understand Harlem at the height of the Great Depression. This wasn't the Harlem Renaissance anymore. The poetry readings and jazz clubs were still there, but underneath, people were desperate. Families were hungry. Men who'd worn three-piece suits to work were now selling apples on street corners. And when people are desperate, they gamble. The numbers racket was the lifeblood of Harlem, an illegal lottery where you could bet a nickel and win $50. For people making $7 a week working 12-hour days, that nickel represented something more valuable than money. It represented hope, and hope was the most profitable currency in Harlem. Dutch Schultz saw that currency. He was a German Jewish mobster from the Bronx who'd made millions bootlegging during Prohibition. Started as Arthur Flegenheimer, changed his name to sound more intimidating, built an empire on beer, whiskey, and violence, lots of violence. But Prohibition was ending. The 21st Amendment was about to be ratified. Dutch's brewery empire was about to become legal, which meant competition, regulation, lower profits. He needed a new revenue stream, something the government couldn't touch. So he looked south to Harlem. Saw all that money flowing through the numbers game, millions of dollars every year, all in cash, all untaxed, all unregulated. And he decided he wanted it. All of it. There was just one problem. Harlem already had royalty. Madame Stephanie St. Clair, the Queen of Numbers. A Caribbean immigrant who'd arrived in New York with nothing and built the most sophisticated numbers operation in the city. She employed hundreds of runners, paid off dozens of cops, and ran her empire from a brownstone on 133rd Street with an efficiency that would make any corporation jealous. And her enforcer, her protector, was a young man named Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy was different from the typical muscle you found in organized crime. He wasn't just a triggerman. He was educated, self-taught from books he'd read in prison. Shakespeare, philosophy, military strategy. He understood that respect in Harlem wasn't bought with fear. It was earned with loyalty, with intelligence, with protecting your people. When Madame St. Clair's runners got robbed, Bumpy got the money back and made sure it never happened again. When dirty cops tried to shake down black businesses, Bumpy didn't just pay them off. He made them disappear. Not always violently. Sometimes their careers just ended. Sometimes their reputations crumbled. He was strategic, calculated, and he absolutely refused to bow to Dutch Schultz. January 1933. Dutch sent emissaries to Harlem. 3 well-dressed white men in expensive overcoats, driving a Lincoln Continental, parked right outside Madame St. Clair's club on 133rd Street like they owned the block. They sat down at her private table in the back. The message was simple and direct. Work with Dutch. Merge your operations. Pay him 60% of your profits, or get buried. Madame St. Clair, a woman who'd survived poverty, racism, and every attempt by the mob to push her out looked at these white men sitting in her club, drinking her champagne, threatening her empire. She smiled. Then she said 2 words. "Get out." The emissaries turned to Bumpy, standing in the corner, arms crossed, face expressionless. One of them, a thick-necked enforcer named Carlo Benedetti, pointed at Bumpy. "You want to be smart about this, boy?" Bumpy didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. That stare. The one that made grown men check their life insurance policies. The one that carried 11 years of prison violence, of street fights, of survival. The emissaries saw that stare, and suddenly the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. They left, reported back to Dutch, and Dutch Schultz, who'd never been told no by anyone, certainly not by a black woman and her enforcer, made a decision. Burn it all down, starting with him. Dutch didn't just want Bumpy dead. He wanted it to be a message. Public, brutal, terrifying. The kind of death that makes everyone else fall in line. The kind that reminds people what happens when you refuse Dutch Schultz. He assembled his deadliest crew. 15 men, not street thugs, professional killers. Men who'd survived wars with Lucky Luciano, with Meyer Lansky, with the deadliest gangsters in New York. Men who'd killed cops, judges, rivals, witnesses, men who didn't miss. Tommy, the executioner. Vento was point man. Tommy had killed 16 people that police knew about. Probably twice that in reality. Always close range. Always looked them in the eye. He took pride in his work. Marty, Ice Pick Delaney, specialist in making deaths look like accidents. 34 confirmed kills, 0 arrests. Big Mike Rossetti, 300 pounds of muscle who'd once beaten a man to death with his bare hands in front of 20 witnesses. The witnesses all claimed they saw nothing. 12 more killers whose names appeared in FBI files but never in court records. Ghosts who did Dutch's dirty work and vanished. February 14th, 1933, Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Bumpy got a tip at 3:00 a.m. One of his informants, a numbers runner named Jimmy Quick, burst into his apartment on 139th Street, out of breath, terrified. Dutch's crew was planning to hit Madame St. Clair's main counting house on Lenox Avenue at dawn. They were going to steal everything, kill everyone, send a message written in blood. Bumpy told Jimmy to warn Madame St. Clair. Get everyone out, hide the cash. Then he did something that seemed insane. He went to check it out. Solo. His people tried to stop him. "Boss, it's a trap. They're waiting for you." Bumpy knew it was a trap. That's why he went alone, because bringing his crew would start a war. Dutch had more men, more guns, more money. A war would destroy Harlem. But if Bumpy went alone, if he handled this himself, maybe it ended different. Or maybe he'd calculated that Dutch wouldn't expect him to walk into a trap deliberately. That the sheer audacity of it might give him an edge. Either way, at 4:15 a.m., Bumpy Johnson walked toward the Cotton Club basement. Not the famous Cotton Club downtown, where white audiences paid top dollar to watch black performers. This was the real Cotton Club, the after-hours spot on 142nd Street, where Harlem's players came to drink bootleg whiskey, play high-stakes poker, and settle scores. The basement was storage, crates of liquor stacked to the ceiling, card tables, a single exit through a narrow staircase. Perfect place for an ambush. Perfect place for a massacre. 4:32 a.m. Bumpy descended those stairs. The wood creaked under his weight. The air smelled like cigarettes, whiskey, old sweat. One light bulb swinging from a wire, casting shadows that moved like living things. And then he heard it. The sound of safeties clicking off. 15 guns. 15 men stepping out of the shadows behind those crates, from dark corners, from behind the staircase itself. They'd surrounded him completely. Tommy the executioner, Vento, stepped forward, gun in hand, smile on his face.
He always smiled before he killed someone. Dutch sends his regards, boy. Bumpy stood there, hands at his sides, face calm as Sunday morning.
He looked around the room slowly, counting. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 15. He looked back at Tommy. That all he sent? Tommy's smile faded. Because that wasn't bravado. That wasn't a bluff. When Bumpy Johnson said something, he meant it. And standing there outnumbered 15-1, asking if that was all they sent, that wasn't posturing. That was calculation. You got about 5 seconds to beg, Tommy said, raising his gun to Bumpy's head. Bumpy tilted his head slightly, studying Tommy like he was looking at a chess problem. You're making a mistake. What mistake? You're about to be dead. The mistake, Bumpy said slowly, is thinking I came here alone. All 15 guns stayed trained on him. But now there was hesitation. Doubt. Tommy glanced toward the stairs. Nothing. Looked back at Bumpy. You're bluffing. Bumpy smiled for the first time. Cold. Dangerous. Then shoot. Nobody shot. Because here's what Dutch Schultz's men didn't know. Bumpy Johnson had been fighting since he was 10 years old. Charleston, South Carolina, before he moved to Harlem. Street fights where the loser didn't go home with bruises. They went to the hospital or the morgue. Prison riots at Sing Sing, where survival meant being smarter and meaner than everyone trying to kill you. Wars over territory, where one wrong move meant dying in an alley. He'd learned something that most men never learned. Violence has a rhythm: action, reaction, chaos, resolution. And right now, standing in that basement surrounded by 15 killers, Bumpy Johnson controlled the rhythm. Tommy's finger tightened on the trigger. Last chance. Bumpy moved. What happened next, nobody could fully explain afterward. The one survivor's testimony was confused, fragmented, contradictory. But here's what the evidence showed. Bumpy didn't go for a gun. He went for the light. One punch. The hanging bulb exploded. Glass and tungsten filament showering down. Darkness. Complete, absolute darkness. Then chaos. The first shots came wild. Panicked, men shooting at shadows, at sounds, at movement they couldn't see. Tommy screaming, "Hold your fire! Hold your fire!" But fear doesn't listen to orders. In darkness, surrounded by other armed men, everyone becomes the enemy. And in that darkness, Bumpy Johnson became something else. He knew that room. Had played poker there 100 times, knew every crate, every table, every support beam, every corner. Dutch's men didn't. They were shooting blind. And when you shoot blind in a room full of your own people, you hit your own people. One by one, you could hear them going down. Not from Bumpy's bullets. He barely fired his gun. He used his hands, used their confusion, used the fact that in the darkness they were killing each other. A scream. A body hitting the floor. Another gunshot. Another scream. The sound of bone breaking. Someone pleading. Someone crying. Someone calling for their mother. Tommy tried to rally them. "The stairs! Get to the stairs!" But Bumpy was already there, waiting. And Tommy, the executioner, Vento, who'd killed 16 men, who'd never been afraid in his life, felt something he'd never felt before. Pure terror. The violence lasted 3 minutes. 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. 3 minutes of darkness and chaos and death. And then silence. When someone finally opened the basement door from upstairs, let light spill down those steps, here's what they found. 14 bodies, not all dead, but all down, broken bones, gunshot wounds from friendly fire, unconscious, bleeding, moaning in pain, and one man sitting against the wall, hyperventilating, gun still in his shaking hand. Marty, Ice Pick Delaney, the only one still conscious. Bumpy Johnson was gone, vanished like smoke. Marty Delaney crawled up those stairs. Took him 20 minutes. Every step was agony, broken ribs, maybe worse, maybe internal bleeding. He didn't know, didn't care. He just needed to get out, get away, get to Dutch. He made it to the street as the sun was coming up. 6:47 a.m., golden light hitting the brownstones, people starting their day. Nobody noticed the man covered in blood staggering down 142nd Street. He flagged down a cab with blood-stained money. "Bronx," he gasped. "Arthur Avenue, fast." The driver almost refused, but Marty put a $50 bill on the seat. That was 2 weeks' wages. The driver drove. 8:17 a.m. Marty stumbled into Dutch Schultz's social club on Arthur Avenue. Dutch was eating breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee, reading the morning paper. Normal morning for the most feared mobster in New York. He looked up, saw Marty covered in blood, went completely still. "Where are the others?" Marty couldn't speak at first, just shook his head. "Where are my men?" "Dead," Marty finally whispered. "All of them." Dutch stood up slowly. The newspaper fell from his hands. "He what?" "He let me live." Marty's voice was shaking. "Let me live to give you a message." The entire room went quiet. Dutch's lieutenants, his accountants, his bodyguards. Everyone stopped, watched, waited. "What message?" Dutch's voice was ice. Marty reached into his jacket. Every gun in the room came out, but Marty just pulled out a single playing card, the ace of spades, covered in blood. He placed it on the table in front of Dutch Schultz. "He said to tell you Harlem's not for sale, and if you send more men, send more cards. He's collecting a deck." Dutch stared at that card for a long time. His men waited for the order, waited for Dutch to unleash hell, to send 50 men, to burn Harlem to the ground. Instead, Dutch picked up the card, studied it, then smiled. Not a happy smile. A resignation smile. The smile of a man who's just realized he's met his match. He's got balls. I'll give him that. "Boss, we can't let this..." Dutch held up his hand. "You know what it costs to go to war with someone who's not afraid to die? Someone who's smarter than you? Someone who has an entire neighborhood behind him?" He shook his head. "It costs everything. And for what? Numbers money in Harlem. There's easier money elsewhere." He dropped the card in the ashtray, lit it on fire, watched it burn. "We're done in Harlem. Let Bumpy Johnson have it." The decision shocked everyone. Dutch Schultz, the man who'd gone to war with Lucky Luciano, who'd killed his own partners over disrespect, who never backed down from anyone, was backing down. But Dutch understood something his men didn't. Bumpy Johnson had done more than kill 14 men in a basement. He'd proven he was willing to die for his principles, and men like that, you don't fight them. You either kill them or you leave them alone. And Dutch couldn't kill him. But here's what terrified Harlem. Here's what the message really meant. It wasn't just that Bumpy survived 15 assassins. It was how. Because after that night, stories started spreading. Witnesses who'd been in the building. People who'd heard the screams. And the story that emerged wasn't just about violence. It was about something darker. Some said Bumpy had 4 men hiding upstairs the whole time. That they'd locked the basement door from the outside once Dutch's crew went down. Trapped them in the darkness. Made it a slaughter box. Some said Bumpy knew the basement so well he could move in total darkness, like he had night vision. That he'd practiced, prepared, turned it into his territory. Some said the whole thing was psychological warfare. That Bumpy counted on Dutch's men panicking in the dark. That he barely had to kill anyone because they killed each other. But the story that terrified Harlem the most was the simplest one. That Bumpy Johnson walked into a room with 15 killers and walked out alive because he was simply better than all of them combined. Years later, in 1972, a reporter tracked down one of the Cotton Club's old employees, asked him what really happened that night. The old man smiled, took a sip of his drink. "You want the truth, Bumpy wasn't bluffing. He did have backup, 4 guys upstairs, but he told them not to interfere unless he called for help. Did he call for help? Never did. Didn't need to. Bumpy could have killed all 15 if he wanted, but he let one live on purpose. Why? Because Bumpy understood something the Italians never did. Killing Dutch's men would start a war, humiliating them. That ends it. Fear is more powerful than violence. And after that night, everyone feared Bumpy Johnson. Whether that's truth or legend, nobody knows for sure. The bodies were real. The survivor was real. The message was real. What we know for certain is this. After Valentine's Day 1933, Dutch Schultz never sent another man to Harlem. Bumpy Johnson became the undisputed king of Harlem's underworld. And for the next 35 years, he protected that neighborhood with a combination of intelligence, strategy, and when necessary, calculated violence. The Ace of Spades became his calling card. He kept the original, framed it, hung it in his office on Lenox Avenue. A reminder to everyone who walked through that door. Respect isn't given, it's taken, and if you come for the king, you better not miss. February 14th, 1933. 15 men walked into a basement. 1 walked out, and he carried a message that changed the entire power structure of New York's criminal underworld. Dutch Schultz learned that Harlem belonged to Bumpy Johnson, not because Bumpy had the most guns or the most men, but because Bumpy had something more valuable. The will to do what others wouldn't. The intelligence to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. And the respect of an entire community that saw him not as a criminal, but as a protector. That's not just power. That's legacy.